Welcome to Algonac, an area steeped in history, mystery, and romance. The community is situated on the beautiful St. Clair River. This river has been estimated to be over 3,000 years old. If this is true, then Algonac is a mere infant. Joliet was the first white man to pass along our shores in 1669. This stained glass window in St. Anne's Church in Detroit features Joliet with Father Marquette. At the top of the window are the Indian teepees and the wampum of friendship given by the Indians. The Indians were the first to occupy the land here. We have a record of some 200 Chippewa and Mississauga having been established in the vicinity of Algonac shortly after the founding of Detroit in 1701. The Harsons arrived about 1778 and were the first white family to settle on Harson's Island. Jacob Harson was born in New York in 1716, the son of Jacob Harson and Cornelia Dyckman. His grandfather, Bernardus Hassens, came from Brooklyn in the province of Utrecht in Holland. We learn a little more about Jacob from his petition dated 1790 for a grant of Harson's Island. It states that he served His Majesty from 1761 to 1776 in Sir William Johnson's department as a blacksmith at Niagara. Jacob's petition was denied. However, in the letter book of Lord Dorchester, a letter was found giving him permission to remain on the island, considering the buildings he had erected. An Indian deed was given to Jacob for the island in 1797. There were 19 of these deeds given to settlers along the river before the region was surveyed. Enthusiastic and glowing descriptions of the area in 1701 still leave one to wonder at how very different life was here in the wilderness. Along with other animals, the bear, wolf, fox, lynx, and wolverine were common. Travel was slow and difficult, with the river being the main road. The Harson family struggled through many hardships and privations. Jacob and his wife had 7 children. His daughter Sarah's husband, Isaac Graviot, died soon after coming to the island, and Sarah and her 4 children lived with her parents. The women worked hard, even making their own soap by leaching water through potash to make lye, which was then boiled with grease. The Harsons were strict Lutheran, and the use of firearms on the Sabbath was forbidden. One Sunday, the eldest son, Bernard, was going to shoot some ducks in spite of the rules and accidentally shot his 7-year-old niece, Mary, in the arm. She was taken to Detroit, where the arm was amputated. Much of her childhood was spent in the home of Judge May, where she learned to cook and sew, and in 1814 she became the 2nd wife of Harvey Stewart. Jacob Harson died before 1800. His family was destined to meet a man who would add yet another tragedy to their lives. Christian Frederick Denke was a Moravian missionary from Nazareth Hall, Pennsylvania. He came in the spring of 1802 to establish a mission to the Chippewa, with permission from Chief Nangi, who was camping here at Point Duchesne. He was building his cabin on Russell Island when John Schnall arrived from Fairfield to see how he was progressing. He shared Denke's accommodations at the widow Harson's crowded cabin. A 20-pound keg of powder had been stored in the parlor chimney, the season being summer and the fireplace not in use. Some powder had been weighed out to pay laborers from the hayfield, and in replacing the keg, some of the grains were spilled on the hearth. Denke, in knocking the ashes out of his pipe, ignited these. The explosion destroyed the house and killed Bernard and his sister Sarah Graviot instantly, a pewter platter which had been on the mantel passing almost through her body. Denke finished his cabin and continued to try and work with the Indians. By candlelight at a hand-hewn table, he translated Bible passages and hymns into Chippewa, but the Indians were more hungry for food than for the Word of God. Denke's small crop of potatoes and tobacco did not last long. Eventually, the Indians became hostile toward him because they blamed him for the government's action in prohibiting liquor sales to the Indians. He abandoned the mission in March 1803. For years, the Harsons held family reunions at the old homestead. Some of the Harson descendants in the area include Judd Gilbert, Aline Stewart, Jack Ouimet, the Smiths, Blavitts, McCarthys, Bakers, Johnsons, Littles, Droulards, Genaws, and many more. Another early family on Harson's Island was the Yax family. Hubert Yax was the grandson of Michael Yax and Catherine Irvine. They sailed from Rotterdam in 1741 on the ship Lydia. They landed in Pennsylvania, and in 1747 they decided to emigrate. They started on foot for the German coast of Louisiana, but were captured by a band of Ottawa who took them to Detroit, where the commandant paid ransom for them. Later, they were granted a farm in what is now Grosse Pointe. They had 11 children. The following is a list of supplies Michael Yax was given to begin life anew: 1 plow, 1 axe, 1 hoe, 1 sickle, 1 scythe, 2 augers, 7 chickens, 1 sow, 8 pounds lead, 4 pounds powder, 2 pounds rice, 6 pounds flour, 1 pot of wine, and 80 nails. Walpole Reserve, just 1 mile across the river on the Canadian side, is made up of 3 islands lying between the St. Clair River and the Snycardy. St. Anne's lies east of Walpole, which is the largest island, and Squirrel Island lies to the southwest. Walpole was formerly called St. Mary's Island. It was named after Lieutenants John and Arthur Walpole, surveyors of the Royal Engineers. Their hero, Tecumseh, joined the British in the War of 1812 to regain the land of his tribes. The British made him a brigadier general. He was a familiar figure to the Trombleys, Robertsons, Stewarts, and Harsons, and Captain Alexander Harrow. He hated senseless torture and had a great sense of justice. He was bitter when the cowardly General Proctor fled the area before the Battle of the Thames and left him alone to lead his warriors in a hopeless cause. He was killed in that battle in 1813. His shrine is on Walpole Island, but I have been told he was really buried in secret on St. Anne's Island. The Walpole Island Indians toured Great Britain in 1856. They offered to help in the Crimean War, but their offer was declined. In the early 1900s, the Indians occupied homes in the winter. This one belonged to Ivan Thomas. But in the summer, they still erected their teepees and made souvenirs of numerous kinds. They had a school on the island and a post office that is used now for their research center. Their horse races were well attended. The Mokawana cable ferry has been replaced by a beautiful $1.5 million bridge. Some of the early pioneers of Algonac settled first on Walpole Island. Letters of the Indian agent Keating, written around 1838, tell about some of the white people that were forced to leave when the island became an Indian reservation. Among those listed were William George and Thomas Fish, Robert Nicholas Nathan and Hiram Little, Archie MacDonald, Isaac Klein, Joseph Yax, Joseph Genaw, William Rattray, and Francis Thomas and Alexander Droulard. William Fish moved from there to Harson's Island and later sold part of his property to the White Star Line, and it became Tajmal Park. This was the heyday of Harson's Island. Tajmal Park became a major resort area and favorite playground. People came to enjoy the picnic grounds. Dance pavilion, Ferris wheel, and sporting events. They had a game called Pushing the Ball, which is something we don't see today. There was a bathhouse at the beach. and swimming was always a favorite pastime. The Woods Hotel was at Taj Mahal Park. The White Star Line had a squadron of palatial steamers that ran between Detroit and Port Huron daily. The ships were the City of Toledo, the Taj Mahal, the Awana, and the Greyhound. This is a description of the Greyhound on the day she was launched in 1902. Length 300 feet, breadth 68 feet, with a capacity of 3,000 passengers. Polished brass companionways led from deck to deck. The main deck was finished in oak, the dining room and grand salon in mahogany, and the gentlemen's smoking room in chestnut, stained malachite. There was also a ladies' parlor furnished in white and gold. The ship was carpeted and equipped throughout with luxurious furnishings. Its domed dance hall was polished like an apple. The Taj Mahal was the flagship and favorite of the excursion steamers. She was a side-wheeler and was dubbed the Glass Heck because of her glass-enclosed decks. She carried up to 4,000 passengers, had her trial run in May of 1900, and President McKinley was one of her first passengers. She was also host to President Theodore Roosevelt the next year. She was moored at winter anchorage in 1927 at the foot of Griswold in Detroit when a terrible storm came up. There was a 60-mile-an-hour gale blowing, and the temperature dropped 40 degrees. Her 14 heavy steel cables snapped like they were string, and off she went, up the river, without a soul on board. She crashed into the ferry Promise, which was badly damaged, and veered off and out into the river. She was stopped by the Belle Isle Bridge, where she was found listing tipsily to port, her sides gashed, but still seemingly determined to batter her way up to Lake St. Clair. 2 tugs arrived and pulled her back to her pier. On June 18, 1936, the Taj Mahal hit a rock, ran to the dock at Amherstburg, discharged her passengers, and sank. Her pilot house and deck house were kept intact and set up as a summer home at Merwin Park on the Snycardy. It was destroyed by fire in 1951. Let's pretend it's 1908 and take the trip on the Taj Mahal from Detroit to Algonac. We leave the busy wharf at Detroit and head up the Detroit River. It takes 2 hours and 20 minutes to cross the lake. And we dance to the music of Finzel's orchestra. We see before us the long arms of the U.S. ship canal, reaching out on either side to bid a welcome and guide us safely into the deep current of the south channel of the St. Clair River. This canal was completed in 1871, after 4 years of dredging and building. As we pass the lighthouse, our eyes feast upon the beauty of the flats, and we are reminded of Huldah T. Holland's poem, The St. Clair Flats, which begins, "Where once the scared squaw's birch canoe mounted the foamy wave, the gilded yacht glides swiftly on, and steamships smoke and rave." We approach the old club cottages, the famous front row. The Lake St. Clair Fishing and Shooting Club of Detroit started their club in 1872. In 1906, they changed their name to the Old Club. We are landing at the third clubhouse, built in 1887. This clubhouse will burn down in 1926, and a fourth built in 1927. We leave the old club and head for the Merview. The Merview is a 3-story building with a frontage of 88 feet and 2 wide verandas extending nearly the entire length. It is situated on the largest bit of land in the flats. The Merview is also a beautiful sight at night. There is an elegance here in the many social events held at the club. The menu features oxtail soup, lobster salad, shoulder of lamb stuffed, broiled whitefish, coconut fritters, and for dessert, deep apple pie with cream, lemon meringue pie, and charlotte russe. Besides the 2-step, waltz, and polka, their dance program includes the quadrille, lanciers, ripple, and schottische. At a hop in 1895, entertainment included Mr. McBride reciting William Tell and Mr. Bowling with an exhibition of Indian clubs swinging. In 1915, the name will change briefly to the Muscombe Hotel when it is sold to Archie Steele. Steele will fight the world's heavyweight champion, Tommy Burns, in Mount Clemens. Steele will be knocked out by Burns in the first round. The building will be known as the new club, the Hotel Gorman and Miller's Hotel. It will be raised in the late 1940s, and the 4 winds will stand on this land. As we arrive at the Rushmere, we can see its small vegetable and fruit farm. As with most of the clubs and hotels, they serve delicious fish and fowl dinners. The Detroit Fishing and Shooting Club built this clubhouse in 1884. It can accommodate 150 guests. It will burn down this August. Remember, it's 1908. A new Mammoth clubhouse will be built at a cost of $80,000. In 1923, it will be cut into 3 pieces, and part will be moved down to the old club and used as helps quarters, and part will be loaded onto scows and towed to the mainland near Island Stop by Vern Harson. The next stop is Star Island. It was built by the White Star Line to introduce the middle class to the Flats area. It has 150 rooms, and its dining room is reported to be the largest in the state, having a capacity for seating 500 people at one time. There is also bowling, billiards, and dancing. It will burn to the ground in 1916 on the day before its seasonal opening. The marshland is not as pretentious as some of the other clubs, but it is in good style. It will burn down in 1929. Leaving marshland, we come to Riverside. It will become the Idle Hour and will burn down in 1934. It will be rebuilt, and during World War II, the government will lease the property for use as a barracks. It will close its doors in the 1970s. Notice the cottages to the right of the Idle Hour. We pass these cottages as we head for Gus Trout's. Trout's Hotel will become Forster's and then Cullow's. Trout's largest attraction is the dance pavilion built over the water. It's on the right-hand edge of the picture. Next is Joe Bedore's Hotel. His original building was on the Canadian side. Joe is the lovable character of the Flats and is so well known that people come from near and far to enjoy his hospitality and his gregarious personality. He is a humorous character primarily because of his dialect. He is the typical French-Canadian immigrant whose misuse of English gives rise to many a laugh and even accounts for the fact that stories he tells himself are not remembered because people always laugh so hard at the way he tells them. He didn't think they needed a school on the island for the children, but he sure was proud of his grandson after he taught him to write his name. He exclaimed to a guest, "Meet my niece. He's got one swell educate. The caption on the bottom of this picture reads, "Don't bother no one on de school unless they bother him." There are two favorite stories about Joe that are often told. A man came into his place one day and said, "Joe, I'll bet you a drink you don't know how many doors there are in here." "Course I know," Joe replied. "Der tree door. Front door, back door, side door." "No," the man corrected him, "there are 5. The front door, the back door, the side door, the cuspidor, and Jobador." Joe thought this was very funny, so he tried it on his next customer. But when he tried to enumerate the 5 doors, he said, "Front door, back door, side door, that damn spitbox and me." One summer, Faye Courtney, the actress, was coming to the island on the Taj Mahal, and she fell overboard near Bador's. Joe used a pole to help her out of the river. Later, she sued the White Star Line for $10,000, and Joe was asked to come to court as a witness. He took the stand, and the lawyer asked him to tell what happened. "Wall," said Joe, "the Taj Mahal come round to the bend." The lawyer interrupted with, "Please, Mr. Bador, just tell us what happened." "I go home," he said. And realizing they would have to let him tell it his way, they told him to continue. "The Taj Mahal come round to the bend. Faye Courtney, she fall over. I run out with my pole and fish her out. I see everything she got, and it ain't worth 10,000. The Muir Hotel has the distinction of being the only hotel that doesn't serve liquor. It is especially desirable for ladies without escort. It will be moved and made part of the Lemke Hotel, known later as the Island Hotel, which will burn in 1948. The Maple Leaf Dock is used by the White Star Line to drop off visitors and cottagers who come to Harson's Island every summer. Here's the shoreline as we come back to Taj Mahal Park. The park is named after the ship we are on. Sans Souci Dock is the business section of the island. We stop here to unload freight and mail along with the passengers. How would you like to stay here at the Grand Point Hotel? It is the showplace of the island with a veranda over 300 feet long and 125 rooms. It has a swimming pool, billiard rooms, bowling alleys, dance hall, and spacious dining room. Built in 1895, it will burn down completely next year, 1909. Hassie's house is at the right of the picture. We pass these homes as we leave the Grand Point Hotel. Hassie's home is on the left. In 1983, it will be hit by a tornado, but completely restored. We leave the South Channel and cross over to the Algonac boat dock. And from here, the Taj Mahal leaves without us. We watch as the city of Toledo pulls up and docks. The message on the back of this card reads, "We are having the finest time. This is the boat we came to Camp Algonac on." Camp Algonac was on Russell Island. Excursions ran from Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Terre Haute, and other inland cities. They arrived in Detroit by train, took the steamers here, and were ferried from Algonac in naphtha launches to the dock at Camp Algonac. An advertisement declared, "In all the world, no trip like this." The island was described as the gem of the Great Lakes. It was 87 acres, 1 mile in length, in the center of which was a beautifully shaded oak grove of 43 acres with walks, swings, and rustic seats. Those who desired activity found boating, bathing, fishing, tennis, croquet, bowling, billiards, etc. It boasted a constantly moving panorama of ships, passing the island, averaging one every 4 minutes. 12 to 20 huge freighters, besides other craft, passing up and down the South Channel, were a common sight. The island provided accommodations for 1,500 people. The tents were supplied with wooden floors, cots, seats, washstands, bowls, and pitchers. Private cooking was forbidden in order to maintain the beauty and cleanliness. Meals cost 25 cents in the 60 by 120-foot dining pavilion. There was another pavilion of the same size for activities and dancing. There were separate tonsorial parlors for ladies and gentlemen. A light and power plant was on the island, and water was obtained from water hydrants. There were also officers, physicians, telephones, and a post office. Algonac had put up $1,700 obtained through voluntary subscription, and by paying the taxes secured control of Russell Island from the DBI and W. Ferry Company. The population at the tented colony sometimes numbered 2,000 at a time. The problem of feeding the multitude was a large one, and the fellows who furnished the eatables always wanted to make all the profits, leaving nothing for the men who backed the island proposition. The camp was discontinued in 1909. Campers arrived just the same, and Algonac reaped profits in ferry fares and camp supplies with much less trouble than they did before. Russell Island was owned before 1830 by Louis Brakeman. Louis was on his way from Detroit to Point Duchesne on the schooner Emily on December 13, 1830. There were 7 men and a boy on board. The boat jumped her mast, but did not sink immediately. 2 of the men and the boy reached safety in the yawl, but did not wait for the others. Louis's brother, Peter, went out with several others to try and save the men. But the waves were so high they could not reach the wreck. The men could be seen all huddled near each other on the bow of the boat, dead, frozen. By morning, the ship had sunk and all were lost. Louis's body was found the next August. Dickinson Island was formerly called Stromness Island and was home for a while for some of Algonac's founding families. Today, 95% of the island is owned by the state and is maintained as a wildlife refuge. John K. Smith settled there in 1817 and started a pottery business. A year later, he married Catherine MacDonald, daughter of Angus MacDonald, who also resided there. Aaron Phelps moved to the island with his family in 1840. He had a farm, and one year the water rose and flooded the island. The animals couldn't graze, and in time the supply of feed ran out. The straw was even taken from their bed ticks that the animals might be kept alive. Many died. It was a terrible experience, and he moved to the mainland as soon as possible. Some families in Algonac descended from Aaron Phelps through his daughter Adeline are Cartwright, Mitchell, Brower, Zaich, Forbes, LaParle, Ricoeur, Smith, Hademaker, Ouellette, Meldrum, O'Connor, Bolac, Gina, and Lapanza. In 1800, Algonac was called Point Duchesne. By 1826, it was Plainfield. By 1828, it was called Clay. And in 1836, Manchester. That year, Dr. Justin Rice, Dr. Thomas B. Clark, Enoch Jones, and Bartlett Luce formed the Algonac and Point Duchesne Company. They were to buy land and plat a village to be called Algonac. The name Algonac was selected by Henry Schoolcraft, who was an Indian agent. He wrote in detail about the Ojibwe and Iroquois, and it was these writings that Longfellow pored over in nearly 3 years that made the legendary Hiawatha possible. He chose the name Algonac, which is composed of Ak, land or earth, and Algon, from the word Algonquin, meaning land or place of the Algonquin. The post office didn't change to Algonac till 1843. After John K. Smith left his pottery business on the island and came to Algonac, he became our first postmaster. He was also the first school teacher, first probate judge, first customs house officer, and justice of the peace for the entire St. Clair County. The Indians had great confidence in him and called him the Big Captain. They would come from a long distance for him to settle their disputes. This was his home in Algonac. It was located where the Dairy Queen is now. His son Abram, at the age of 13, carried the mail between Algonac and St. Clair on horseback. He became one of the leading businessmen in Algonac. In 1851, he established the Bonnie Brae Farm where the state park is now. He was also postmaster and served as president of the school board for more than 60 years. This was Abram's home. The house is now owned by Judd and Mary Gilbert. Abram Smith's son Angus was president of Algonac 14 times. This was his home. It became our city hall until 1978, when our present city hall was finished. This is the home of Charles Dowswell. In 1865, he came to this county and established a general store. He had the only drugstore and also the only lumber yard and mill. He was also an undertaker, and he was postmaster 17 years and held school offices. The building is now occupied by the law offices of Kane, Clemens, and Yack. According to the 1870 census for industry in Algonac, there were 3 fisheries, a turning bowl business, a shoemaker, a blacksmith, a steam sawmill, a planing mill, and a shipyard. The shipyard was at the foot of Mill Street. Between 1836 and 1897, 91 wooden boats, steamers, schooners, and tugs were built here. The last owners were Abram Smith and Son. About 9 p.m. on August 31st, 1892, the Western Reserve, just 2 years old, broke in two and sank in Lake Superior. 26 people died. Harry Stewart, wheelsman, was the only survivor. The ship was the sensation of the day as she was made of steel. But the steel wasn't tempered and was like glass in the grip of the heavy sea. Stewart told the dramatic story of the sinking and of his struggle to reach shore 12 hours later. Stewart was Skip Baxter's grandfather. This is probably the best-known picture around the Great Lakes. Seth Whipple's famous watercolor of the tug champion shows her in 1881 with her tow of 8 schooners going from Lake Huron to Lake Erie. The tug was built in 1868 at Detroit and burned in 1903 after riding out a storm at Put-in Bay. Put-in Bay was originally named Pudding Bay by Captain William Thorne. His vessel lay at anchor in a bay in Lake Erie. They were entirely out of provisions excepting flour, which they stirred into a pot of boiling water, calling it pudding, hence the name Pudding Bay. Captain Thorne led the American fleet to recapture Mackinac Island from the British after the War of 1812. He was lame at the time from a dislocated hip, could not climb a mast, but sat in a chair securely lashed to the seat, and was hoisted by pulleys to the masthead. It was a very foggy morning, but understanding the route so well, he took the fleet in unawares to the British. He has many descendants in the area, including his 4th great-grandson, Ken Richardson. In those days, most of the men were usually first a farmer, next a soldier, then a sailor, and last a farmer again. One soldier that came here was Robert Falkerts, but it was a very different army that he served in. He was in the army of Napoleon Bonaparte, from 1809 until his ruin on that momentous day at Waterloo, June 18, 1815. After Napoleon was exiled, Folkerts returned to his home in Germany, married, and had 5 sons. They emigrated in 1852, finally locating in Algonac. John Robertson, born 1846, served under General Sherman in the Civil War and participated in the famous March to the Sea. After the war, he sailed, and in November of 1868, he was shipwrecked off Point aux Barques and for 18 hours was lashed to a mast in a freezing gale before being rescued. That ended the call of the lakes for him. This picture is of the crew at the life-saving station at Point aux Barques. He was best known as a public official and served 33 years as supervisor for Clay Township. He was also Justice of the Peace and performed about 75 marriages. During his first years, no marriage license was required. As village president, he got the waterworks and electric lighting plant. Everyone was put on a flat electric rate. By 1903, the light plant still operated only half the night. The Detroit Edison took over in 1919, at which time steam power was taken out and electric power installed. I wish I knew the story concerning this picture. It is the capture of Negro Woolton, Algonac Jail. We'll take a walk down St. Clair River Drive in the early 1900s. It was called Water Street then. The building on the left was the Swartout Hotel. The one in the middle was John Robertson's law office, and to the right of that was the American Express Company. Looking south, Charles Worthy's, Jim Harper's, Lieberman's Pools, Avers Barber Shop, Dr. Burke's Drugstore. He had the first electric car in Algonac. And last is Beal's Bakery. This is a close-up of Beal's Bakery. Looking south, from right to left, Hammock Grocery, Gunnis Hardware, John Robertson's office, Nugent and Dick Ames Meats, and in the same building on the corner is Carmen's Bank. These are some of the same stores looking north. The Gunnis business later moved to the riverside. The last owner was Frank Heminger, who moved into a new building in North Algonac after urban renewal. And this is Wallace Hardware. The last owner of this business was Harold Timmons until it burned down in 1963. He lives now in Harper Woods but returns every Wednesday as an active member of the Algonac Lions Club. He is probably best known for his interesting and informative column in the Courier-Journal called Pride of Lions. He is also president of the Algonac Boating and Historical Society. Looking south, James W. Gilbert's store is on the left. This store delivered goods by land and also by water. There was probably no store in the state that had launches go right into the store. He had 2 of them with which to supply his customers along the flats. As the customers waited at the back counter, they could see the naphtha launches in front of them. Next to Gilbert's was Den Swartout's, the one-armed marshal's home, Charles Ames and John East Boatworks, and Elmer Forbes' home and fish market. This building, built by Captain Flood in 1869, became the Charles M. Gilbert & Son business. At different times it was a hotel, livery, grocery, and furniture store. At the time this picture was taken, it was a grocery. Those are chickens hanging upside down. It was winter, and the box in front of the store was covering the water hydrant and was filled with manure to keep it from freezing. This building was torn down in 1948 and replaced by a new Gilbert's Furniture store with the funeral home behind it. This is May and Charles Poole in front of the first Poole store built about 1836. This is J.J. Poole's store. The business that Charles Poole started kept 5 generations of Pooles working. R. Lee Poole, son of Jasper Poole, was a great friend of the Chippewa Indians and spoke their language fluently. In 1948, he was made honorary chief Wewanash in a very colorful ceremony. He also spoke German and French, was an accomplished pianist and soloist, and was known for his beautiful English script handwriting. He was our village clerk for a number of years. Looking south, the Algonac Savings Bank is where this bowling alley was. In 1900, the bank in Algonac was robbed. On January 12th, Abe Galton put a sign in his store window which read, "The bank with its big new safe was blown to hell and busted the town, but I have confidence in you, so come and get your groceries, 'cause I am busted too." On Saturday nights, the famous Indian brass band crossed the river and played in Algonac's main street. The resorters crowded the sidewalks and sauntered from souvenir store to popcorn shanty. People enjoyed vaudeville at the Classic Theater. This later became the Algonac Theater. This was the Lankin House, originally the Jackson House, built by Michael Jackson around 1853. It changed names several times, becoming the Riverview, Johnson, Beatty, Park Hotel, and Sherwood. In this picture, it was the Park Hotel. In 1913, the Kimball Hotel was replaced by the Algonquin Hotel. It was owned at this time by Max Ouimet, who is sitting by the first post. The Douglas is still here, now called Lucille Manor. This was our council in 1898. Angus Smith was president. The councilmen were Ames, Hammett, Curry, Jackson, Smith, Incan, and East. They made all of their important decisions in the old town hall built in 1876. It was used as a library before it was torn down in 1956 to make room for the new elementary school. The Colby Monument, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, originally on the property of the old town hall, was the dream of Captain Isaac Colby, a veteran of the Civil War. This is Captain Colby on his horse. He was assisted in the promotion of the monument by Reverend Jerome of St. Andrew's Episcopal Church. The monument was unveiled July 4th, 1907. In 1960, it was moved to the village park. This is the old Townsend House. It's still here, and it's just north of Henry's on the opposite side of the street. These 3 houses are on St. Clair River Drive. The one in back on the river was built by Bernard Townsend. The one in front of it was built by Hoyt Townsend. The one on the right was replaced by the Galton House and is now owned by Carrex. The next picture will be a side view of the house on the right. This is the view of that house looking north. This house is on the corner of Mill and St. Clair River Drive and was built by Captain John Galton. It is now owned by the Garshot family. This house was built by Captain Ames. It's on St. Clair River Drive. It's now the home of Sarah Ippolito. This is the Pointe de Chêne Bridge, looking towards Algonac. This house at Pointe de Chêne belonged to Dr. Black. It was on Ruskin. This picture of the Union School was taken in 1923. They are working on the foundation for the new school, finished in 1925. It was named in honor of Roy T. Gilbert. Born here in 1878, he opened his undertaking establishment in 1903. He also had the furniture store. He had an outstanding career in public life, holding the following offices: Clay Township Clerk, Village Clerk, Justice of the Peace, Village Assessor, Clay Township Supervisor, elected in 1938 to the state legislature, and served 54 years as a member of the Algonac Board of Education. He was honored in 1963 as an outstanding citizen of Algonac. One of his main efforts was devoted to the building of Green Drive on Harson's Island as a state highway. Another man involved with our roads was James W. Gilbert. In 1915, he envisioned a road built across the marsh between Perch Point and Pearl Beach. It was termed an impossible project. He shared his dream with Calvin Curry, Curtis Champion, Newton Aspenleiter, and Roy T. Gilbert, and the Dyke Road became a reality. The interurban, almost unknown today to persons under 40, was an American transportation phenomenon, linking city with city, and in its heyday carrying thousands of passengers every year. In 1907, there was a crash at the Nook when the Fisherman's Special collided with the southbound. 15 were injured, including Mrs. Alfred Walkerdine and Thomas Ball of Algonac. A new Starline dock was built just north of the Angus Smith home. Students from the Union School played basketball in this building because they didn't have a gymnasium. This gives a better perspective of where the dock was. This is the present boat launch. This picture of the riverfront includes Chris Smith's Boatworks. This is a close-up of the Smith's Boatworks. The bottom half of the building became the home of the Algonac Courier. Christopher Columbus Smith, born here in 1861, was the founder of the Chris-Craft Corporation. He liked to sit in the sun and whittle decoys. He got to wondering about the water bugs he watched skating the waters around Algonac, and he said, "Someday somebody is going to build a boat like those bugs, one that will go on top of the water instead of through it." He ended up doing it himself and built the hydroplane. He was also postmaster and had the first telephone exchange in Algonac in the back of his post office. His sons grew up in the business. Later, they adapted the hydroplane racers to produce a fast and popular runabout. They also turned out luxury cruisers and yachts. During World War II, they set a world record in landing barge production and were awarded the Navy E, the highest award that can be awarded a civilian organization. Harson Smith, grandson of Chris Smith, made the cover of Time magazine in May 1959. He was board chairman of Chris-Craft. Harson realized early in the 30s that the future of Chris-Craft lay not in speedboats or luxury yachts, but in family boats for every man. Chris-Craft was sold in 1960 to NAFI for $40 million, and Harson handled the investing of the profits. Warner's Foundry produced brass castings and chrome hardware for the Chris-Craft boats and other boat companies. They also had a cement and gravel builder supply business. The two-story part of this building is now Algonac's Medical Center. This is Gar Wood and his 10 Miss Americas, with his mechanic Orland Johnson. Garwood invested 50 cents in a small polished cylinder that he developed into the first hydraulic lift for dump trucks, an invention that netted him an estimated $50 million. In 1916, he went into business with Chris Smith and later bought Smith out. He won the Harmsworth Trophy 9 times and was known as the Gray Fox of Algonac. His home in Algonac was moved to the corner of Mill and St. Clair River Drive and is owned now by June Crocker and her brother. The Santa Maria II was a replica of Columbus's ship Santa Maria. It was built by Andrew Cuthbertson and his son Tom in Tom's backyard. It was started in 1933 and finished in 1936. Many have pleasant memories of a trip on this ship. In the 1940s, the South American was chartered for senior trips to Chicago and Mackinac Island. She was another of the favorite excursion steamers that will always have a special place in our hearts. Built in 1914, at first she had but 1 stack. The second, a dummy, was added later to enhance her appearance. She was a beautiful ship and is described as a jewel in the night with her rows of lights aglow. She was only one ship of what had once been a fleet of dozens. She was